Although technically it should be pronounced Uranus. That is a little too much of a stickler even for me. I prefer Uranus, which is actually funny because everybody says, oh, you just say that so you're not saying Uranus. And it's like, well, if I want to say Uranus, I'll say Uranus. And honestly, Uranus is an adjective. It's like, oh, it smells quite Uranus in here. So it's really no better when you think about it. And I've heard all the jokes. The only funny Uranus joke was done on Futurama when Philip Fry says something about when Farnsworth invents the smelloscope and Fry says, well, I'm glad you don't point it at Uranus, and nobody laughs. And he says, oh, to avoid that joke, we renamed Uranus hundreds of years ago. I was like, what did you name it to? Urectum. I love that joke, actually. Uranus is another giant planet. It's several times bigger than the Earth. You could call it a gas giant. Would they actually call it an ice giant because it has a lot of ice in it with that thick atmosphere? I'm not a planetary scientist, and so as far as I'm concerned, it's a giant gaseous planet, so it's a gas giant. They'll probably get angry at me for saying that. But that's how it was when I grew up, and if you want to call Pluto a planet because that's the way it was when you grew up, I'm going to stick with gas giants. Probably completely hypocritical of me, but I don't care. The thing about Uranus that's interesting is actually to look at it through a telescope. It's big, but far enough away that you can just barely see it as a disk with an aperture telescope. I've seen it. It's cool. It's green. I mean, it's obviously a green planet, a little green circle in the sky. It's quite lovely. What's interesting about Uranus, besides everything else, but the most interesting, the most amazing thing about it, is that it orbits the sun sideways. You know, the Earth is tilted by about 24 degrees, something like this globe. I guess that's the moon, though. But it's close enough, the way it happens to be tilted. The Earth isn't spinning straight up and down like this. It's tilted, which is why we have seasons. Mars is tilted by about 24 degrees. All the planets are a little bit. Even Jupiter is tipped by about 3 degrees. Uranus is actually tipped 98 degrees. Its North Pole is actually tipped down a little bit. And you say, well, why don't you just call it the South Pole? And there's a definition of the North Pole is that if you're over the North Pole of a planet looking down, the planet's spinning counterclockwise. So it's not just tipped over, it's not 102 degrees, it's actually 98 degrees. I'm probably getting that wrong, 92 and 90, whatever the numbers are. Somebody else can do the math. It's Sunday afternoon. So it's tipped way over. And so it's orbiting the sun sort of sideways, and that means sometimes we see it sort of, it has rings as well, like the other 4 big planets, and sometimes we see those rings sort of face on, and sometimes we see them edge on. Here's a photograph taken from the University of Arizona. This is an infrared picture. You can see some storms on the equator of Uranus. They're glowing red, not really red, they're just sort of hot spots. You can see the rings, and you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 moons. It's hard to say how many you can see. Quite a few there. You can see the banding on it, just like Jupiter and Saturn have. But why does it orbit sideways? Isn't that odd? Here's a picture taken from the Keck telescope in Hawaii, also in infrared, taken over several years, 2001 to 2005. As it's orbiting the sun, right, sometimes we see the rings like this, and then as it comes around, we see them edge on. And so over time, we're seeing them narrower and narrower. We don't know why Uranus is tipped over. Did it get hit by something huge that knocked it over? Maybe. There were some folks that put out a paper recently that said that it could have had a giant moon one day in the past, billions of years ago, and there were these weird gravitational interactions that could have tipped the planet over. I'm not sure I'm buying that. There are a lot of problems with that idea. Most likely it got hit by something really hard and knocked it over. But we don't know. And it's so far away and so difficult to study. We've only had either big telescopes observing it or the Voyager 2 probe to pass by it 20 years ago or 30 years ago. And so we don't have a long-term space probe orbiting Uranus to look at it, investigate the system, to give us clues about why that is. So that's actually still one of the biggest mysteries in the solar system. And I think that's pretty cool.